Tomorrow Never Knows with me, Bob Wilson, and Sir Warren Brown of the Beatles Kingdom. Our guest is Antony Rotunno. Anthony is an English teacher, a musician, a blogger, and a podcaster from Egham, a town in England that's so small, some of the people who live there have never yet heard of it. But he's also lived in Thailand, Laos, Italy, and Spain as well. He's been a Beatles John Lennon fan for 30 years, and about a year ago, he put his knowledge of John Lennon to work by the Glass Onion on John Lennon podcast, a deep dive into John Lennon's life, music, and complex psychology. I recommend it highly. We stole that introduction from Jude Kessler, but I do recommend him highly because she had such a nice introduction. And before we started the show, Anthony was an English teacher to me, teaching me to say the name of his town and different things, which I appreciated. So welcome, Anthony.
Hi, Bob. Hi, Warren. How are you?
Welcome, Anthony.
I've got to stop laughing at my own joke. Whenever anyone reads that thing about no one in Egham having heard of it, I've got to stop laughing at that. It's not a good joke at all.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
But
Great to be
before
here.
we start more business, I have to say hello to our sponsor. And who is our sponsor? Beatles Magazine. Beatles Magazine is a publication with 370 plus million visitors in all their pages, read by thousands of fans around the world every day. Beatles news updated daily, 24 hours, audio, video, photos, interviews, contests, additional materials, and more. Follow Beatles Magazine, the most complete online coverage, 24 hours a day and 8 days a week.
8 days a week.
8 days a week. I love it. So, all right, Anthony, you come highly recommended to us on many things, and some people on the show had good things to say about you, and they all seem true. But you especially became recommended on Revolution 9. So just from that introduction, please take it away, as Paul might sing.
Oh, we're going for that right off the bat. Okay.
Right up the jugular.
Revolution 9. What would you like me to say?
Well, I listened to Revolution number 9, and I'm, highly confused. There's nothing else quite like it. I wouldn't picture it being on a whole side of a Beach Boys album or a Bob Dylan album or even a Pink Floyd album. I also couldn't picture it from George, Paul, or Ringo. I know George had something to do with it, but you know more about that than me. I'd just like to know all about it. I'm wondering how it took up, 1/4 of the White Album.
Okay. Well, yeah, if I played devil's advocate, what a lot of people would say, I can't speak for everybody, of course, but there would be a decent chunk of people who would say, I listened to that once. They'll either say it was a load of rubbish or I didn't get it, which is absolutely fine, but it's basically an 8-minute sound collage. And it does have a genre, which is musique concrète. And if you've heard of, people like John Cage, Stockhausen, Filippo Berio, which, people have heard of that now, or I don't know if minimalism really fits with that, but experimental music, there is actually a genre. And I did a show about it in December, and it's actually the show I'm most proud of. Episode 25, plug. And I spent a long time putting the show together, and I felt a bit like John Lennon putting Revolution 9 together, because I did it over 3 or 4 nights. I was working quite late in the morning, and it was very spooky, in fact, because it's a spooky piece of music. But I find it strange that people would listen to something like that once and then totally dismiss it, because there's clearly such a lot there. And it's not for everyone, I wouldn't call it a song, for example. And perhaps you could say it shouldn't have been on the White Album. Perhaps it should have been on the Zappo label, that kind of crazy label where there's no rules, you can put anything you want. But basically, it's a very well thought out sound collage. And in about 1999, 2000, something like that, I discovered a very early website. It's just 20 years ago now, when the internet was in its infancy. And it was a site called Beethoven. B-E-A-T, Hoven, obviously a pun on Beethoven. And this guy did a breakdown. I suddenly realized that it wasn't random. It was random in a sense. I think they did 2 takes of it, of John Lennon pushing the faders up and pushing them back down again. That was obviously quite random. But it's a very well put together music. And it's really a mood piece. It's not, you wouldn't put it on at a party and start dancing to it, clearly. But so I did a show about it, and I'm very happy that it was actually became the most popular show within a week of me putting it online. And basically, as you said, it could only really have come from John Lennon and Yoko. We have to give Yoko a lot of credit for this. I don't know if you're familiar with Alan Kozin, but I used some sound clips of him Yeah, he appears on a lot of podcasts, and he's very good. And he said it was the sound of revolution, but I would just say it's the sound of the 60s. You know, I would say get yourself some headphones. I'm not going to recommend herbal jazz cigarettes or not recommend. That's entirely up to the listener. But, you know, you need to really concentrate on it. And obviously there's stereo panning. And I think if you sort of lie down with some headphones on, you know, maybe in the dark, I don't know, again, it's up to the listener, and really kind of think of 1968 and think of this weird mixture of love and peace that was around then. I mean, think about just two things alone, you know, the killings of Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, you know, and this is a year after, you know, flower power and peace and love. And think about everything that was going on. So basically, it's a mood piece, and you have to be in the right mood, or you can create the mood. You know, it's not something to dance to, and I wouldn't call it a song. I'd call it a piece of art. So that's my pitch.
You asked for us to pick 3 songs from the White Albums each, and you said kind of to choose the lesser ones, but they're all kind of Beatles songs. So as I mulled it over, I just picked my favorite 3. Well, I picked Back in the USSR, Obla di Obla Da, and in honor of your show, I picked Glass Onion. Warren, which 3 did you choose?
I picked Rocky Raccoon, Your Blues, and Savoy Truffle.
Okay, so I know that you know this White Album inside out. So what do you have to say about the songs that Warren and I picked from among its track listings?
Okay, so yeah, I'll go briefly through the ones you've said. So Back in the USSR, I mean, for me, it's just a perfect album opener. It's just got tons of energy, but it's different. It's Paul doing rock and roll, but it's different to Long Tall Sally. It's very, I don't know when you listen to it, he sounds very confident. I love the confident Paul McCartney. And I think confidence is an attractive thing for a singer. I mean, vulnerability is also attractive, but it's almost like it's the guy who did Kansas City or Long Tall Sally, but it's 4 years later. It's a more adult, more adult person, a more knowing person. And it's just so much confidence. And I mean, I would say Paul's solo career, the lyrics are not always great, but the lyrics are pretty good here, and they have a Chuck Berry kind of meter. You know, when he's telling a story, it's very Chuck Berry. I'd say it's much more Chuck Berry than Beach Boys. And I'm sorry, go on.
No, just gonna ask you, like, in your synopsis, if you could mention the Beach Boys any part in this, or you know, I think you know where I'm going.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, obviously the harmonies. It's basically, I think it's kind of Chuck Berry meets the Beach Boys, to be honest. And then 2 years ago, the back end of 2018, so just over a year ago, you know, this 50th anniversary box set. And I mean, when people used to ask me what's your favorite Beatles album, I always used to kind of say that old cliche about, oh, it's like naming your favorite child. I would say that box set really just put the White Album at the top, and it's going to be at the top, I think, forever, no matter what they do with Let It Be, or if they go back and do a Revolver box set. Because in a way, it's a practical thing, because if you're going to a desert island, for example, you'd want as much as possible, right? So you pick the longest album, and it's so diverse, and it's the ultimate for me. But I love this slow version. Do you remember that kind of instrumental came out a couple of years ago? And it turned out that they'd recorded it slowly and speeded it up. So that's that one, yeah.
When they were in India, did Mike Love claims to have suggested the lyrics, like, and you know, like he told Paul to name towns and such in a song. Was there truth to that?
Oh, I'm not sure about that actually. I mean, this you'll find like recently there's been a lot of people kind of saying, "Oh, I did this and I did that," and there's a guy called Alistair Taylor who used to work. He was Brian Epstein's assistant who actually went to the cabin the very first time. He claims to have co-written "Hello Goodbye" with Paul. I honestly don't know. I'd have to check that, but I'm sure the fact that Mike Love was there. I'm sure. Are you a big Beach Boys fan then?
I love their harmonies. You were talking about harmony. Oh, yeah. I listen to Brian Wilson all day.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, I was going to come on to this later with one of the other shows. I'm not one of those Beatles fans who thinks that they were better than everyone else at everything else. I absolutely don't think that. I think they had their core skills and a lot of core skills. They were very good at a lot of things. But, you know, for example, I wouldn't say their harmonies are better than the Beach Boys or better than even, I don't know, Queen, for example. but they just had so many things going for them. I think that's really what it is. And the overall effect. They're just my favorites. They're my favorite band. I mean, Bob Dylan, I guess we'll talk about that later. But
Yeah, we can get into him later. I would love to hear your thoughts on him as well. I think
yeah, I mean,
we're the
cool.
strongest songwriters and excellent singers.
Yeah.
Different in the Beach Boys, but they kind of admired each other. It's hard to say one is. People have taste, so they like one better. In my taste, I would say the Beatles are the best band to come out of the '60s. I put Dylan in a different category just because of the vocal styles and such.
Yeah,
I mean, blows everybody. I mean, I don't think anyone can touch him at his best lyrically.
Yeah, I mean, you could say. I mean, we'll come to this later, but I think Dylan was ahead of the Beatles in a lot of ways. I mean, if you look at the lyrics of, let's say, the Freewheeling Bob Dylan album, which was '63, I think, and then the one after was The Times They're Changing, I think was even '63 or '64. If you compare that to, She Loves You, Yeah, 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 I mean, Dylan was writing stuff with 12 verses already, very early days. So, yeah, I just think they had different strengths. I don't think he had the melodic qualities of the Beatles.
And he didn't need them. I mean, the Beatles
exactly.
Loves You is an untouchable classic. Anybody wished they had written, and Dylan songs like that were masterpieces as well. What about speaking of masterpieces, or it's just really great songs? I don't want to call everything a masterpiece, but Obla Di Obla Da.
Yeah. I'm not going to go masterpiece with this one.
I concur.
I actually prefer. I actually like the. I like the acoustic version. They completely remade it, and there's that story of John Lennon coming in and bashing the piano. I actually like. I think the original version could have been like an amazing B-side, for example. But I think it was a good single for someone else. It was Marmalade, wasn't it? They went to #1 in England with that song. So clearly it's a very good commercial song. But this is one of those things, you see, something I do take issue with. People say, I think John Lennon said the White Album is every Western genre. And this is not a reggae song. This is not Bob Marley. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a reggae. It's a, it's on the offbeat. That's reggae. And the song "I Call Your Name" has a little bit of ska, but this is not Bob Marley. I kind of put this as pastiche, and I think John Lennon and Paul McCartney are more or less equal. I mean, my favorite is John Lennon, but I see like talent-wise, I'd say they were equal. But I think Paul was a bit more guilty of pastiche. So I'm gonna.
I believe Jeff Emmerich said this. That John Lennon viewed this song as more of Paul's granny music.
Yeah. I mean, there's a kind of category of Paul songs, some of which I love. Like I love Your Mother Should Know. I love Honey Pie. What other ones? I'm not mad on Maxwell Silverhammer, but it's still got virtues. He kind of labeled it granny music, but then again, my argument the other way is that. We give John Lennon so much credit, but what would Strawberry Fields be without the Mellotron intro, which was Paul, and that whole score, which was George Martin, and what would Walrus be without that score? And John Lennon didn't really contribute to that. He would give very, very vague instructions. I mean, Paul would, for example, Penny Lane, the high piccolo trumpet solo. Paul would whistle the notes to George, who'd work them out on the piano. John would say, Mr. Kite, I want to smell the sawdust on the floor. You sort it out. See you in a couple of days. So I see them as equals. But yeah, what do you think about Obla Di Obla Da?
I think it's the way you summed it up, that they're equals is good. Just because they had slightly different strengths, I don't think takes away from it. I mean, Paul said he loved Busby Berkeley and that music, and I don't think one kind of music has to be eliminated or invalidated because it's not another kind of music. I think Paul did a great job on those, and John in his more serious, I think slightly less melodic style, especially the songs on the White Album. Generally, they sound like acoustic songs that decided to go electric sometimes.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
I don't think one has to be better or worse than the other. It's just, they'll put Paul down and say, well, you're writing granny music, but
Mm.
kind of an insult to it, but it's really a beautiful song that could have been in the 1920s or in a great musical film.
Yeah. So, sorry, go on, Mark. Sorry.
I just think it's a great sing-along song.
Mm. That's what I mean. I mean, the Beatles tick so many boxes. You know, I don't consider it a great piece of art, but I'd rather listen to this at a party than I don't know, Yer Blues. I guess we're coming to that, aren't we? It just ticks a different box. I mean, one of the things with Paul McCartney is I'm 44 years old now, and I think when I was 24, I probably would have written off Honey Pie or something. But now I'm a bit older, and also Honey Pie came out as an instrumental on this box set 2 years ago, and it's just fantastic. And again, George Martin gets some credit for the arrangement, but I think you obviously the young rebels, a guy who's 21, 22 is going to be much more attracted to John Lennon. I mean, that's clear. But what they have in the end is staying power, right? Someone said in an interview that Paul did, people are going to be singing these songs if we're still around, if we haven't blown ourselves up, they'll be singing it in 1,000 years. We might not be around more than about 50 years, but no, let's be optimistic. You know what I mean? I mean, at the end of the day, it's melody and harmony, and there's no reason why melody and harmony should go out of fashion in 200 years.
And in honor of your podcast, I picked the song "Glass Onion." So, could you unravel that onion for us and tell us what's going on?
Yeah. On the subject of the title of my podcast, I always emphasize it's Glass Onion : on John Lennon. It's only because I realized after I put my stuff online that there's other ones called Glass Onion. It's such a cool title. It's such a weird title, but I like this because it's got a subject matter which is basically kind of making fun of the fans, for reading stuff in, and I don't know whether we ever regretted the lyric of the walrus was Paul, but I think it's actually because in Magical Mystery Tour, when he's doing I'm the Walrus, Paul's actually wearing the walrus costume. I think. Don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on that, but I think so. But I like it. I mean, I love the drums. I mean, I don't know what you guys think of Ringo, but I think all those people who don't rate Ringo are just, nowadays, with all these isolated tracks on YouTube, and his drums just sound better and better. Just amazing. Very simple, not complicated, but amazing. And I like the kind of dirty guitar. I think that's mainly George. It sounds like what's the guitar he used to use, like late 60s? I don't know. I can't remember. But and then you got those strings at the end. It's just very weird. It's a very White Album, I don't know if we're supposed to make too much sense of it. It's probably meant to confuse us.
I would say Ringo was the perfect drummer for the Beatles.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, I mean, it's just brilliant. But I mean, it just sounds so good. I mean, Abbey Road again last year. I don't think the Abbey Road box set elevated the album as much as the White Album, probably because the album already sounded amazing. But those drums just sound great, and it's the choices as well. I mean, I was going to say to you guys for a joke, can we please not mention Pete Best on the show, because it just seems to come up all the time.
I was going to bring him up later because.
All right. No, but I listened to the Decca audition, and I like listening to stuff like early in the morning. Like I like waking up early generally, and I like put the headphones on, and my senses are kind of quite sharp. And I listened to the Decca audition. I mean, it's not bad, and I mean, he sounds all right on My Bonnie and stuff, but he just doesn't seem to make particularly good choices. Like it doesn't. Ringo just makes such fantastic choices, and it's just very, very creative all the time. So
it's a little ironic because the drumming on the White Album you're saying is so into, and then Ringo at the time walked out and he said, "I didn't feel my drumming was very good," and they all think that they said they felt the others weren't getting along with them, and yet the drumming on the White Album is I agree, very good. But which songs did Paul drum? Not to put you on the spot with a question that we didn't discuss, but you're very smart at this and you have quite a bit of knowledge. But on what songs did Paul drum besides Back in the USSR? Was that the only one?
This is not entirely clear. So Back in the USSR is reckoned to be, in fact, Paul, John, and George. But I think the bulk of it is basically Paul. But I think John and George may have whacked a snare drum or something. But yeah, that's basically Paul. Yeah. Dear Prudence, there's a bit of revisionism or a couple of camps. It's Paul is definitely doing the main part up to the very end. You know, the very end where it kind of goes into almost a drum solo. It's just all over the place. There is if you listen to the isolated vocal track, you can hear a regular drum beat continuing through the vocal track. So it's reckoned that possibly Ringo came in and overdubbed that very complicated drums. Yeah, I think it's when it goes, "Won't you come out to play?" and it's just all over the place for the last minute. But then other people say it's Paul, but I don't really understand why someone can't ask Paul or Ringo. You know, surely they could tell us, or maybe they can't remember. Who knows? But what other ones were there? I mean, he did percussion on some of the songs he did, I think, entirely on his own. Maybe something like Mother Nature's Son. I haven't thought about this for a long time. I think Why Don't We Do It in the Road was Ringo. So yeah, I think just back in the USSR and Dear Prudence.
Here's a strange question. In your opinion, how do you rate Paul as a drummer?
I think
he's a good bassist.
Yeah. I think he's pretty good.
He's a good guitar player, period.
Yeah, he's a good guitar player. He's a very good piano player. I was going to say earlier actually that I play a little bit of piano, and there's some amazing videos on YouTube of piano tutorials, and there's a guy who teaches you how to play Martha My Dear, and it's very, very good. It's not only is it difficult, but it's very creative. I think he's a kind of a functional drummer. I think he has a nice sound, but I wouldn't put him in Ringo's class, to be perfectly honest. There's what's the name of that song he did with Steve Miller? Do you know?
Oh, was it on
It was the day that he walked out of the business meeting. It's called My Darkest Hour.
Good excellent recall. I was not going to get it.
Yeah, it just came to me then. Yeah, because it fit with the subject matter. Because they'd had a row at this meeting because they wanted him to sign with Alan Klein. And it was like on a Friday afternoon. He said, "Oh, screw you," and they all walked out. And Steve Miller was around, and Paul ended up drumming. The drumming on that is very good. I found out recently that he was on a song called Old Brown Shoe, which was the B-side of Baldur on Yoko. It's pretty good on that. I always thought that was Ringo. So I think he was good, but I wouldn't put him in Ringo's class, to be perfectly honest. What do you think? What do you think?
I think that you nailed it. Ringo is the drummer number one, but Paul could sit in and do something sometimes in the studio on a simpler tune or something and carry the way. But if you had to put one or the other behind the kit, I think you would want Ringo there, other than for a novelty.
Yeah. No, totally agree. Yeah. It's just so creative. That's the thing. It's the sound, it's the creativity, it's making great choices. I mean, I play a few instruments, but I'm not a drummer, but I talk to drummers about this all the time, and they love him.
Yeah.
Since I already asked you about Revolution 9, I snuck that in at the front on purpose. No, I didn't. I screwed up the question. But Warren would then have the next question. So, Warren, we bring you in now for your insight. Did we do Warren's questions? Did I just walk right over?
We didn't do Warren's three songs.
I'm on the ball today. It makes me nervous because your podcast is so good. So you've thrown me off my game. But we had Rocky Raccoon, Your Blues, and Savoy Truffle. I apologize there, friends.
Yeah, I would put Rocky Raccoon in the camp of Obla Blada, in that it's just a great song to listen to. I like the lyrics. I mean, there's one classic line. Her name was McGill. She called herself Lil, but everyone knew her as Nancy. I mean, that's a great line.
Yes, it is.
I'm not a big fan of the stuff at the beginning where he puts on an American accent. I find that really annoying. The same with Mick Jagger.
I love it because it goes along with their cowboy type Western songs that they seem to be putting together, and I think the lyrics are just off the charts.
Yeah,
and great song.
But would you call it a country song? This would be my issue.
Well, I just think it has a country theme to it. It's not necessarily a country song. it just goes along with the country feel to it.
Yeah, no, I agree, like country feel, but if you compare it with, say, Act Naturally has a country beat and those brilliant George Harrison country licks. So I'd say the same. But don't you find it so bizarre that Paul McCartney's in India on the roof and he thinks about writing that song? Don't you just find some of the things they wrote about in India are just absolutely bizarre? Like,
yep.
I mean, the ones that I really feel do fit would be like Child of Nature. It's interesting that John wrote Child of Nature and Paul wrote Mother Nature's Son. They were on the same page there.
Yeah,
and you can totally understand that being in India, but John's meditating and writing about being suicidal, and Paul's writing reggae songs and country songs.
Yeah, they seem to have guns on their mind.
Yeah.
Bungalow Bill, happiness is a warm gun.
Yeah. Can I just bring up another point with you guys?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. As you know, I mean, I've been doing this John Lennon podcast for a year, and one of the things I've found is that he's become a more compelling figure. But I also find, there are, holes in his personality, which is fair enough. We all got holes in our personality. But one of the things that does kind of madden me a little bit is when people ascribe kind of mystical value to stuff he does, where Paul McCartney is often seen as very superficial, and everything John Lennon does is mystical. When John Lennon has a cup of tea, he's like he's drinking the tea of wisdom and knowledge. You know what I mean? Would you agree with that? So spirituality and depth. Would you say
on
that?
An outtake of one of our shows where we had to cut a bit out. I was on with a friend who was a guest. I'll just say Jude Kessler yelled at me.
Oh yeah.
Because we're very friendly. She's great. She's been on about 4 or 5 times. But when we were talking, she loves John so much. I wasn't at all offended, and she was afraid she'd offended me. She hadn't. But I liked her, zip, like sheer enthusiasm. But I had said I thought Paul drove the White Album. And I was talking about how James Taylor had said when he watched in the studio, Paul was kind of in control. It's not an insult to John. I just said I thought Paul was the one kind of pulling it together a little more. And Jude took me to school, and her pure emotion came out. And I had said to Warren, we were talking about it. It was funny, and she was afraid she offended me. She didn't, as I said. And I just like showing to John. Sure.
Talk about a song John Lennon did, and that's called "Your Blues."
Yeah, I mean, this would be in my top 10 Beatles songs. I mean, both the song and the recording.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this could only have been done by John Lennon. I'm sure people could do very good covers, and I'm sure they have, but just this actually does make sense with India, because what was happening in India, I think they had, they did smuggle some weed in and maybe, a bottle of whiskey or something, but basically they were fairly clean. And I think John Lennon had so much to process, and I talked about this with the Revolution 9. I think withdrawing from, he's withdrawing from drugs, drink, he's withdrawing from Beatles fame, because they went somewhere quiet. And I think, anyone who's been through any withdrawal will tell you that there's a period where you just feel like death. You feel like, and just the vocal, the line where he says, Dylan's just like Dylan's, Mr. Jones. I can't do it, but the power on just on that one word. Oh, thanks. the power on that one word. It's just, there's so much in it. And the recording as well, they recorded this basically in a cupboard in EMI. They only had enough room for the 4 of them. I mean, can you imagine if there was some video of that? There's not even any photos. Or how amazing would that have been to have seen that?
I gotta ask, why did they? I didn't know that. Why did they do that?
I think it was just a spontaneous decision. I think it was just, they're constantly experimenting and trying to get a different sound, I guess. And I don't know. I think if someone hadn't told me that happened, I wouldn't have said, "Oh, that must have been recorded in a cupboard." It's not like that. I guess you get some effects of being. It probably affected the playing because they're in a confined space, And it's just so raw. It's so John Lennon. I mean, I don't really use the word genius a lot. You know, I think there's been a few geniuses in history, but if you were going to call him a genius, this is the kind of song. It's so uniquely him, and it's so raw, and it's so open, and it's top 10.
Well, John Lennon don't get enough credit for his guitar playing, and it shows what he can really do in that song.
Right. Which guitar did he do? I think he did the first solo, or did he do the second solo? I'm not sure.
I think it was the first, but I'm not positive on that either. So, but yeah, you were talking about them smuggling drugs in Rishikesh, and while they were smuggling drugs, Ringo Starr was smuggling beans.
Yeah, that's right. That's such a British thing to do.
I just thought that I think that's so funny. You know, that's the reason why I brought that up.
Yeah, it's funny. Actually, I had my mum on the podcast. I had my mother on, which I thought I was really pleased we did that, and we talked about how the '60s in the suburbs of England wasn't swinging at all. There was no flower power, and we were talking about food, and I'm sure you know that England has a terrible reputation for food, but nowadays, because we have a lot of continental influence, you know, people eat pasta and people love curries from India and stuff. But 50 years ago, English food was so bland. It was just like, you know, you got a potato, you got a little bit of vegetable, and if you're lucky, you got baked beans. So I think the English system is not very conducive to exotic food. So
right,
yeah, he smuggled apparently like a whole suitcase of beans.
yes,
That was better than Paul smuggling weed into Japan.
Yeah, that wasn't a very good move, was it?
They opened his case and they found a suitcase full of beans.
Well, of course, you guys, Bob, we talked about the Rutles, didn't we? On the message.
Yeah, I wanted to bring them up. You have some great insights into them. I thought they were a gas. I love them.
Oh, I love it. Well, no, in that, of course, they're caught taking tea instead of LSD.
I had tried to invite Neil Innes onto the show, and it was ironically a week before he passed away. So I wished we'd gotten him on. But tell us more about the Rutles. You know, you brought it up. You got to keep going on us now.
Okay.
Yeah, please do, because I know nothing about this.
All right.
We're a gas.
Well, are you familiar with Monty Python? Do you know about?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Eric Idle, who's one of the Pythons, he was. I don't know if he moved to America in the 70s. Maybe he did, but he presented SNL. Of course, you guys know Saturday Night Live, and he made some contacts with those guys, and they started with a thing called Rutland Weekend Television. And Rutland is actually a place in England, but it's not near Liverpool. And it just became this thing called the Rutles. And he asked Neil Innes to write some. He said, "Can you write me some Beatles songs that aren't Beatles songs?" And Neil Innes came up with these genius pastiche songs. And if you don't mind, if you can put a link, I just did a show about this on another show. We did a commentary of the film, and it's making fun of the Beatles story, but in the most affectionate way. And I mean, really, the ultimate tribute is that George Harrison's actually in it, playing an interviewer outside of a. It's called Ruttle Core, and the logo is a banana instead of an apple, of course.
It was just funny from start to finish, and it was
brilliant.
It was just the first time I saw it, I just couldn't, and evidently George loved it too. If you'd be in it, I just thought it was hysterical.
I mean, it's just brilliant, and I mean, it is really. I mean, it's made for a wide audience. Yeah, you can enjoy it. But I think hardcore Beatles fans, we did this commentary, and we were noticing stuff while we were doing the commentary. I mean, just to give you one example, instead of the song "Help," you've got a song called "Ouch." It's like, "Ouch, you're breaking my heart. Ouch, I'm falling apart." And they have a video which is like the Another Girl video from the Help film, and it's just brilliant. It's close enough to Beatles. I mean, they have Get Back is called Get Up and Go. It's like, get up and go back home. And you have the Ron Nasty, which is the Neil Innes, is the John Lennon character. you know, you see him pushing someone off the roof just before they start playing. It's that kind of thing, you know.
And then
Sounds
John
interesting.
Belushi being called Ron Decline as
That's it.
Alan Klein was pretty hysterical.
Absolutely. I mean,
What
it's
do you
just
say
brilliant.
people jumping off roofs rather than have a meeting with them because they were so scared of him?
Yeah, yeah. It's something like 110 accountants go into the meeting and only like 60 come out or something like that.
But if
But
anyone hasn't seen it, I believe it's currently up on YouTube.
yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, with Spanish subtitles if
And
you
the
want.
music is memorable. Like it's not that I was amused for a second with those songs.
Mm.
Like those songs, I really genuinely enjoy and
Yeah, they are.
laugh at it. But musically, they're pretty well played. I mean, they're excellent songs.
Yeah, I mean, there's one called oh God, it's so good I've forgotten the title. In love. Yeah, it's called I Must Be in Love.
Yeah,
And we agreed because that one doesn't necessarily sound like it doesn't have bits that are in Beatles songs because a lot of the other ones he actually uses a little passage of a Beatles song and puts it together with something else. Very clever.
you paid for that later.
Yeah, but do you know what? Do you want to hear a massive irony? You guys
Yeah,
have you've heard of Oasis, right?
yeah.
Yes.
They came out in the 90s and they were kind of tagged as Beatle copies, which they weren't really. They were kind of evoking the spirit of Revolver era Beatles. Neil Innes actually sued them, which is irony upon ironies, because they had a song called Whatever. I'm free to be whatever I. And it sounds like a Neil Innes song called How Sweet It Is to Be an Idiot. So the Ruttle ended up suing someone else, which is just hilarious.
Sue me, sue you blues.
Oh, yeah. But yeah, I couldn't recommend the Rutles enough. Brilliant. I don't know what. How did we get on to talking about that? I don't know. Anyway.
I don't know. It was fortuitous though, because I think I'm glad you brought it up because I know you've done this show on them, and everybody should tune into that. But they
Yeah.
really are special, and I'm so sad that we lost Neil Innes recently.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just thought his Dylan imitation I saw on YouTube was, I guess, from the show over in England that you mentioned. Did you call it Rutland Weekend or such?
Rutland Weekend Television.
But
Yeah.
it was so funny the one he did about Dylan. I think I'm trying to think of the opening line. It was like, something tortured me, now it's your turn, and then he started playing the song and he got the harmonica in there. But it stands as a song, and it was such a good spoof of Dylan, and it was yet complimentary at the same time because you had to love the music and the guy to do the imitation. So it was a great mix of things you just can't throw together. It has to, naturally be there. I thought he was like, you said you don't throw the word genius around. I think he
Mhm.
was a comedic genius.
Yeah, I mean, comedy songs are not easy, you know. I mean, I've tried it. I did like a tiny bit of stand-up comedy years and years and years ago, and I did a spoof of Wonderwall by Oasis called Slumber Wall, and it was all about them ripping off the Beatles. And it's not easy, but I mean, but that's taking the tune of something and putting new words, which is slightly different, you know, to making up a comedy song. It's not easy.
But you asked how we got into it. I think we
Mm.
segued between your blues and Warren's other choice, Savoy Truffle.
Okay.
Uh,
I'll go on the Savoy Truffle here. I'm going to talk about Rolling Stone magazine
mm,
for a minute. They're noteworthy for compiling list of 100 greatest in many categories.
mm.
One of the most popular compilations
Okay.
in this series was 2012. They did 100 greatest guitarists of all time. And this next song that I picked was very interesting. It gives insights on the inventive talent of each guitarist and how influential each was upon the world of music. And on this song, Savoy Truffle, I believe it was George Harrison who wrote, I think he was ranked number 11th at the time, wrote a song about Eric Clapton, who was ranked number 2. And the subject matter had nothing to do with the guitar, but the song came out as Savoy Truffle. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you mean the name Savoy Truffle?
Yes.
Yeah, it's basically they all come from a box of chocolates,
Okay.
which is another candies, as you'd say in the States. Again, just brilliant subject matter. I mean, I'm sure there's other songwriters who've written about weird, have chosen weird subject matter. But yeah, he just goes through Montélimar, cream tangerines. He's just talking about chocolates in a box. Because in England, you do this in the States, all the chocolates have names. Like when you get a selection box, and they often have very exotic names.
Right.
What we do in England, anyway. But very interesting. Another show I listened to, they reckon that it's all a metaphor for hard drugs, and that he's warning Eric Clapton, that the rotting the teeth is a metaphor for frying your brain or whatever with heroin, because Clapton had his own. I don't know if he had a heroin habit by '68, but I'm sure he was well on the way. So that was interesting. I never heard George say that, but that was an interesting take on it.
Right.
But amazing song. I mean, it's so funky. The bass is brilliant. Paul's bass, and the other thing about this is that he mentions obla di obla die in the lyrics. I mean, what other case have you heard of where a songwriter in a band references a song from the same album that they've just put out? I can't imagine that happening, but it's just a great sounding record, and those horns and. But yeah, to answer your question, the title is just a box of chocolates, basically.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of weird how you can make a song from a box of chocolates, and it do what he did with it was unreal.
Yeah, great song. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Well, I think one of the best on the album myself.
Yeah.
All right, Bob, I'm going to hand it off to you.
I was just gonna follow up on that song. When the Beatles had musicians come into the studio and play horns or something, like sometimes you'll see in a book somebody gets mentioned, but they really didn't, don't give big credit all the time to other people, except Billy Preston and maybe Eric Clapton. But I was just wondering, when they have horns and stuff, like who came in and played them?
Yeah, just professional musicians. I mean, Ronnie Scott. Have you heard of Ronnie Scott's jazz club?
That's news to me.
Ronnie Scott's a famous name in jazz in England. He played the sax solo on Lady Madonna, and apparently they did something that got him angry, so the solo comes out quite angry. I don't know what they did, but they just got professional musicians, and I mean they were people that wouldn't really have anything to do with rock and roll. And they mostly just considered it a job. It must be like middle-aged guys who come in. So I don't think there's any famous names who put strings or horns on their songs, apart from Ronnie Scott. Can you think of any famous?
They did have musicians come in, like wouldn't it? Like they would, everybody's got this and that, but was there a reason they didn't really give anybody credit, like on an album cover or something often?
Oh, the people who played horns and strings, you mean?
Yeah, like I think that would mean a lot to them. Like and as the passage of time goes to, even for the families, they were in to say, "Hey, look, my grandfather was on the White Album, and my grandfather was on Lady Madonna."
Well, one of the reasons was in those days they didn't put a lot of credits on them. I mean, apparently, I may have got this wrong, but I don't think even George Martin was credited on the very early singles. If you can believe that. I mean, everyone knew he produced them. That would have been in the music press. I just think it wasn't really done. And I mean, from everything I've read, the musicians that came in, a lot of them are a bit kind of condescending about pop music anyway. And they just considered it a job, so they probably wouldn't have been too bothered. But I think nowadays, obviously online, you can find credits. I use a website called the BeatlesBible.com, which has got all the credits for all the songs.
That's a neat thing to look into. I'm going to look that up. But you said you like to be spontaneous, which is looking for day in spite of all the danger. But we were talking about Revolution 9 when we opened the show. I was supposed to ask that here. So I'm going to amend my question.
Okay.
If Revolution 9 wasn't on the record and George Martin had said the White Album would have been a great single album, and I know the fans wouldn't want that, But if they had turned it into a single disc, and I'm putting you on the spot because you like to be spontaneous.
Yeah.
So, what do you think if they did do a single disc? What would have made the cut, and what might not have
Ooh.
made the cut?
Hard question there.
Oh, well, do you mind if I just quickly pull up Wikipedia and get the track list?
Yeah.
Can I do that? Can I do
Go
that?
ahead.
I cheated. I have the track listing ready. I looked it up while we were talking.
Do you want to shout the titles or shall I? How should we do this?
You do it.
Uh,
You do it.
All right, I'll give you a yes and no. Or
Okay.
I'll give you a yes, no, or maybe. But we're probably going to end up with more than 14 songs.
Okay.
All right. Hang on. Track listing. Where are you? Here we go. All right. Back in the USSR, yes. Dear Prudence, yes. Glass Onion, maybe. Obladi, maybe. Wild Honey Pie, no. Bungalow Bill, no, even though I love it. I'm not, by the way, in favor of the single album. I think I love all of it. So, While my guitar gently weeps, yes. Happiness is a warm gun, yes. Martha, my dear, possibly. I'm so tired, yes. Blackbird, yes. Piggies, probably not. Rocky Raccoon, no. Don't pass me by, no. Why don't we do it in the road, no. If you're going for a conventional kind of 14-track thing. I will, maybe. Julia, yes. Birthday, possibly not. Yeah, Blues, definitely. Mother Nature's Son, yes. Everybody's got something to hide except me and my monkey. I love. But if you're going for conventional, possibly not. Sexy Sadie, yes. Helter Skelter, yes. Long, 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 yes. Revolution 1, yes. There's too many yeses. Honey Pie, no, for the sake of getting it down to a single album. Savoy Truffle, yes. Cry Baby Cry, yes. Good Night, no. So I don't know how many that was.
It was too many, but I can understand your point.
Yeah.
Well, you had to do that off the top of your head there, so it's hard to whittle it down.
Well, to be perfectly honest, my friends and I have played this game a few times, so I have thought about it before.
It would be a nice bootleg to just make what the album would be if it was a single album, and everybody could compare their choices as well.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what. A great thing is Richard Buskin, who we mentioned earlier, who's a pretty high-profile Beatles author and podcaster. On his show, which is called The Beatles Naked, they did John Lennon's White Album and Paul McCartney's White Album, and they made a single album of the John Lennon tracks. So like a John Lennon 1968 solo album with the others helping out, and then a Paul McCartney 68 solo album, and they came out really well. Because the John one kicked off with Revolution, the B-side of Hey Jude, the fast one, and Paul's kicked off with Back in the USSR, and they put together a track listing. So that would be pretty cool.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty interesting, and I did put you on the spot with that.
No, that's fine.
Immediately.
I've been doing this for 30 years, playing these games with myself.
No, you definitely handled it with aplomb, but I just wanted to say I didn't give you any warning with that one.
That's fine. No, spontaneity's great. Yeah,
Let's take an emotion out of our answer. If we took emotion out of the answer, did George Martin, as a musical fellow, have a point there that it would have been a better album if it had been a single album?
It would have just been different. I mean, what's very difficult is because I wasn't there when it came out. Because now, someone discovering the Beatles now, you got the whole catalogue, and you've got everything you need. If you want energy, you put on With the Beatles and Hard Day's Night. If you want sort of something mellow, you put on maybe Rubber Soul. If you want something acidic, you put on probably a Revolver and maybe some of Pepper. If you just want something completely uncategorizable, you put on the White Album. And if you want something smooth and excellently played, then you put on Abbey Road. So we have to kind of put ourselves in the shoes of a record buyer in '68, I think. But sure he's got a point. I mean, I think if you'd made a single album, it probably would be considered the best Beatles album. Put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
There's 14 absolute cast iron killer songs.
Yes, it is. I agree. I think you can split that up into two albums and make a rock and roll type album, and you can make almost a country western type album out of that album. Yeah.
Well, they had a theme, didn't they? Which side is it? Side 2's got lots of animal songs on it.
Exactly.
I'm consulting this again. Well, Martha, My Dear doesn't name check an animal, but it's about his dog, of course. But you've got Blackbird, Piggy, Raccoon. Well, there's only 3. Okay, not quite the whole side, but
yeah, it's still interesting. Well, you got everybody's got something to hide, but their monkey.
Yeah.
So.
It's more Freudian when you say it.
Right.
Rephrase it.
Can I give you my 3 unsung? Well, not unsung. My
please
3.
Do. Please do.
Please do. We went through ours. It's your turn.
Yeah. I mean, they're not really unsung. As Bob was saying earlier, I don't think there's too many things which people haven't heard of now. But I think Savoy Truffle, the one you mentioned, is a good example of. I don't think too many people actually know that song, to be perfectly honest. You know, it's one of those ones. It's not one of the famous ones. I've got I'm So Tired again. In the same way as Your Blues, it's so John Lennon in that it's so direct, but it's not direct in a kind of facile way. And he sounds very calm. He sounds sort of a little bit. He doesn't really sound sleepy, but he sounds calm. And then he just launches into this, you'd say, I'm putting you on. And Macca, Paul McCartney's right there with him, I like Paul McCartney's kind of gut bucket harmonies that he does. Like on I Want You, She's So Heavy. When he goes, heavy, Paul's really got this kind of gritty thing. Like on, Maybe I'm Amazed, that kind of vocal. So that one's huge. Everybody's got something to hide except me and my monkey. I mean, just the idea of using a fireman's bell as an instrument. It's just great. And the guitar licks are fantastic. The title's fantastic. And of course, some of the lyrics came from the Maharishi, all that stuff. The deeper you go, the higher you fly. Your inside is out when your outside is in. I love the idea that, they went to India and they incorporated some of the Maharishi's sayings into the music. How awesome is that? What do you think the monkey is? What do you?
I think that song was about heroin, and the rest of it was a cover story.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
That would make sense. I mean, surely Yoko's not the monkey. She wouldn't be too happy about him calling her a monkey.
Yoko's the one that brought the monkey.
All right. Yeah, monkey's got other connotations, doesn't it? Yeah. Who knows? The other. Go on.
We'll finish up with that because I was going to ask something that was also spontaneous, so be on guard.
Okay.
But finish your thought. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's all right. I'll just do my 3rd song, which was Long, Long, Long.
I'm really terrible to you guys. I apologize. I gave my songs, and then I'm like blowing past Warren's and blowing past yours, and you're our guest. Please forgive me. I was a little nervous you come on because you're sharp, and I'm like, man, this guy's going to come on and show us up. You're pretty good, so you've thrown me off the game, but please do your next one.
Well, I like to say that that's a very interesting pick for you, and I am waiting to hear what you got to say about that.
Yeah, well, this is one of the ones that the 2018 remaster really changed because they brought it up in the mix. I never quite understood why this was so low in the mix. It's almost like, I mean, I get that it's a kind of quiet song and it's a meditative song. I don't really see the point of making it so you can't actually hear it properly. So I think, the new remaster or the remix just made it perfect. And again, the playing, just the, Ringo's doing these drums and it's not very subtle, It's not, it's kind of, I don't know what the word is. It's just very effective. It's a little bit, he definitely was a little bit heavy-handed at times. I mean, I don't like the drums he did on his own song, Don't Pass Me By. They just sound like someone just whacking the drums with no kind of finesse. But they really work on this, and you got that lovely piano. I think that's Paul McCartney. And obviously it's so George. It's so one side of George. Piggies is the other side of George. The angry, anti-establishment, grumpy kind of George. But this is... if you wanted to sum up spiritual George in one song, I mean, this is it. And then you got that amazing bit at the end where, the story of he's playing the organ and someone had a bottle of wine on the top of the organ. And the bottle of wine starts rattling and you can hear it. And then you hear someone go, oh, which I'm sure was probably Yoko.
Yes.
And but just for the record, I really really like a lot of Yoko's stuff. I like a lot of her art. I'm not mad on all the music, but there's a few tracks, the spirit behind it, and her contributions to Revolution 9, and I think that did. Doesn't that sound like her? Wouldn't you say at the end of that song? Probably
Yes.
was. She's so distinctive, you know. Whatever you think of her, I mean, I don't really get into the personality thing because what the hell do I know? I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy like 50 years after the fact, trying to guess what these people were doing. You know.
Right.
Yes, we're all kind of doing that to some extent. Aren't we? So,
Have you ever met Yoko?
no, I've met Cynthia Lennon.
Oh, awesome. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was a bit. We were a bit cheeky, to be honest. I was only about 21 or 22 at the time. I used to go to Beatles conventions all around England. Well, not all around England, but let's say 5 or 6 different cities. Yeah, not all around England. That was a complete exaggeration. I went to the one in Liverpool. I've been maybe 3 or 4 times. It's the August bank holiday, the end of August every year. And I went to one in, I'm going to say it was Nottingham, which is a town in the Midlands, in the centre of England. And Cynthia was the guest. And I mean, to be honest, she was exactly what you would expect. Just a nice lady. There was a group of us, group of young lads, 21 years old, all kind of grouped around her, you know, because she was attractive, you know.
Yes, she is.
And one of us cooked up the idea. Someone said, I'll introduce Yoko into the conversation. And I feel a bit guilty about this now. And someone, we were asking her a couple of questions, just being really polite and everything. And then someone said Yoko, and then basically her eyes rolled. She didn't say anything. She didn't say, "Oh, bitch" or anything like that.
Right.
I don't think she's that kind of person. But no, I never met Yoko. No.
Right. All right. I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think Cynthia is a good-looking woman, even in her elder years.
Yeah.
So
I would. I mean, do you guys understand what John's attraction to Yoko was? Because I think Victor Spinetti, who was in the Beatles films, he was in Hard Day's Night Help, Magical Mystery Tour as well. He was a TV producer in Hard Day's Night, you know?
Mm-hmm.
He summed it up really well. He said, John's attraction to Yoko was, it's like when you're a kid and someone gives you a piece of plasticine to play with or a toy to play with and said, make something out of that. She was like that because it's kind of like a regression to childhood. And, LSD, things like LSD, there's definitely a kind of childhood sense. I mean, the British psychedelia scene, things like Syd Barrett, the Pink Floyd, it's very childlike. And I think Yoko represented that thing that you love about being a child, which is where there's no barriers, and you don't have a filter, because my theory is that, adults, I came up with a line years ago, adults are children who've read the How to Be Adults book, we all learn how to be adults, and we have to be adults in polite society, but there's a child in all of us that's probably screaming to get out. And I think she represented this kind of no filter, this regression in the best sense of the word to childhood.
Right.
And I think, my feeling about Cynthia, again, I only met her for 10 minutes, but I think she was just a bit too normal for him, to be perfectly honest.
Exactly.
I
was going to bring that up. I think Cynthia was more like a mother figure, and I don't really think John took to that too well. It was hard to replace his mother, and I just think that had some bearing on his decisions.